jour, le Sahel est en première ligne du changement climatique. La crise bouleverse la vie de millions de personnes. Elle attise les flammes du conflit, elle déracine les familles. La violence et la faim menacent des millions de personnes. Mais les communautés se lèvent et ripostent. Nous ne serons pas vaincus. Ensemble, nous pouvons changer les choses.
Yakamata musojuna sanam murungu mijuna muiwasi da bambanci kwanciyar hankalinmu arzikinmu ne. Sahélien mon frère, le Sahel mon paradis. Yamaba 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 ne. Kala wa fakoi yamaba 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 ne. Kala wa fakoi yamaba 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 ne. Aya ko yamaba wa fakume.
Joklen ñu andi job jog na ñu xalaat suñu bopp xàccandoo dorandoo doonay mbokk yu dëgg buñ ko defee lépp gën a baax ñu xam ne loolu mooy doole suñu sayal nañu ko doole aljana du samu du fi ko jàmbat jàmm sutura ñu fexe ko suuxal foo mënti ne foo mënti bokk joxante loxo mooy dëgg.
Good evening, everyone. And good evening to those joining us online. I am Doug Poe, the president of Phillips Theological Seminary, and I am happy to welcome all of us to Unraveling Empire at the Kitchen Table, Native Women's Wisdom. Whether you're joining us here in person or online, we're grateful for your presence this evening. The Kitchen Table has long been a sacred space, a place where wisdom is shared, stories are told, and communities are formed. Tonight, we gather at the table to learn from the profound wisdom of Native women who are leading conversations about decolonizing, indigenous identity, and liberative change in theological education and faith communities. Allow me to introduce this evening's Kitchen Table participants. Tonight, we are honored to be led by Sherry Russell, our presiding auntie for the evening. Sherry is Anishinaabe Salto, registered at Yellow Quill First Nation in Saskatchewan and serves as Director of NATES in Indigenous Learning Community. The Reverend Dr. Christina Lazardi Hajbi. Latin scholar and associate professor of leadership and formation and director of the vocational formation of office at Iliff School of Theology. Erica Littlewolf Waha. I tried. Director of Storytelling and Narrative Change at Auburn Theological Seminary. We're laughing because I have not gotten that right all day long. No. Dr. Ann Carter Walker of Cherokee Nation, Associate Dean of Academic and Student Affairs, and Affiliate Assistant Professor of Practical Theology and Vocational Formation here at Phillips, and Dr. Lisa N. Dillinger. Citizen of the Chickasaw Nation and Mexican American, visiting assistant professor of constructive theologies at Phillips. These remarkable women bring together centuries of collective wisdom, scholarship, and lived experience. They invite us to unravel the effects of empire and to discover new ways of being faithful communities. So let us gather at the table, let us listen deeply, let us learn and connect with one another.
I'd like to introduce again Hannah Cawhorn. She's on our panel tonight. She is a student at Phillips. She is currently taking my course in Native American feminism and traditions. So we wanted to highlight the fact that we teach what we bring here into this space tonight. Thank you for being here, Hannah. Chokma, hello, and Yakoke, thank you for being here. Tonight we gather to remember and live into the matriarchal traditions around scholarship and wisdom held by Native American and Indigenous people all over Turtle Island. The event tonight is structured utilizing a framework from Native feminism. What makes Native feminism unique is its commitment to its roots in the recognition of women as essential to governance, economics, education, and spiritual formation for the purpose of raising healthy communities based on cultural practices from time immemorial. This form of feminism takes seriously the impact of colonization, capitalism, and patriarchal assumptions of Anglo-Western cultures in diminishing the voices and the agency of Indigenous women and their communities. Native feminism has a living recollection of a thriving society in which power is balanced and not predicated on notions of white supremacy and its hierarchies. It is important to say that not all Native women consider themselves feminists. This hesitancy is because many Indigenous women see the mainstream US feminism as seeking to find justice and equity within the framework that continues to support Western systems of governments and economics, which continue to privilege its stories of superiority. Native women's experiences, intellects, traditions, and stories are too often silenced by institutions that reinforce practices and policies of paternalism by policing access to agency in developing innovative scholarship. Our invitation to you tonight is to engage in a new practice of relationship building in which Dr. Ann Carter Walker and I hope you can experience with us around the kitchen table this innovation. This practice is a contemporary collaboration that reflects the wisdom of traditional matriarchy, and it is a practice of resistance to its colonial constraints. Thank you.
I think she's shorter than me. Good evening. Everyday Indigenous feminists have located the kitchen table as a space where women as generational leaders are infused with power. These are spaces where knowledge and practices of resistance to coloniality are cultivated and shared, where ceremony is practiced, and where ancestral wisdom is literally ingested through the sharing of time-honored recipes. Meaning making happens here within a matrix of tradition, relationship, and practice with granny, auntie, or mother as lead teacher. These gatherings center matriarchal wisdom. They seek to re-tradition leadership and governance with kinship and reciprocity as our guide in the midst of a colonial reality that has seen the breakdown of Indigenous kinship systems, including matrilineal leadership. Tonight, you will view and then practice a rendering of Indigenous women's kitchen table practice. This iteration of the practice would not have found its way to being in this space without the work of Métis scholar Kim Anderson, who is Canada Research Chair in Indigenous Relationality and Storied Practice at University of Guelph, Ontario, Canada. As a leader in Indigenous feminist scholarship and practice, Kim's leadership includes the building of what she calls a granny's cabin, or Nokum's house, on her campus, where the kitchen table acts as a research lab. It is Kim's kitchen table where 4 Indigenous scholars in theology and religious education, including myself and Dr. Dellinger, gathered for a 5-month period to learn and practice kitchen table wisdom together, with Kim presiding as our scholarly auntie and process facilitator. Kitchen table practice also has roots in critical Indigenous education. Following decolonial educator Leanne Bedeta-Somake Simpson, kitchen table practice comes through the land and is inextricably tied to the unequivocal return of the land to Indigenous people and to a radical reorientation of the understanding of the human relationship to the land. This includes the healing of our bodies, psyches, spiritualities, and relationships to ourselves, to one another, and to all of creation. This is a fundamental reorientation of Western educational theorizing and pedagogy, which is often focused upon the individual and the ownership of ideas, and which mimics the colonial settlers' desire to own the land and all living things on it, including Indigenous people. By coming through the land, critical Indigenous pedagogy is, in Simpson's words, quote, dependent upon an intimate relationship of reciprocity, humility, honesty, and respect with all elements of creation, including plants and animals. It is dependent upon a compassionate web of interdependent relationships that are different and valuable because of that difference. Individuals carry the responsibility for engaging their minds, bodies, and spirits in a practice of generating meaning, end quote. This is a practice that is determined to imagine an Indigenous future that centers Indigenous women's knowledge, memory, spirituality, and practice. These practices need not be associated exclusively with cisgender women, with mothering, or even reside in the home. Men, two-spirit LGBTQ+ folk, those young and old, scholars and everyday people, and all others with a commitment to building bridges of solidarity in the social justice project are invited around the table. So there are 4 movements that compose kitchen table practice: ceremony, story sharing, ancestry, ancestoring, and blessing one another. Though kitchen table practice does not have to reside around an actual kitchen table, it should, when possible, include acts of hospitality like sharing a meal. You see there is tea and some snacks in front of you. Sharing a meal creates bonds of kinship and connection to and connects us to our non-human earthly kin. As you eat together, considering the blessings that you are ingesting, those infused into the food through the land, the sacrifices of the animals who provide the meat, if any, the work of those who picked, transported, and prepared the food, the creativity and wisdom of those who created the food. So the first movement, after your table is set, is ceremony. Ceremony marks the opening of a space with reverence to the ancestral well of oral tradition from which the practice grows, and reverence for the communal bonding that will occur around the table. Through ceremony, we mark the spirit of reciprocity with our kin around the table and with our ancestors who have come before us. Tonight, we have the privilege of having Wutko Long to lead us in our opening ceremony in a little while. Wutko, where are you? Hi. The second movement of kitchen table practice is story sharing. In Indigenous story work, a term named by Stalo educator Joanne Archibald, meaning making happens through the process of communal bonding, either through the telling of traditional stories or through lived experience stories. Tonight, our work will focus on lived experience stories. Story sharing draws upon the critical pedagogical work of Paulo Freire, beginning with a question drawn from what he calls a generative theme. Generative themes are identified and brought forth by the facilitator. Tonight, our facilitator is Sherry Russell. She's our presiding auntie tonight. And generative themes arise from what Freire calls the, quote, limit situations of experience, tying conversation to the problems existing in colonized communities. So let me talk a little bit about the dispositions that are helpful during the act of story sharing, because you're actually going to do story sharing tonight. As we consider the work of story sharing, Archibald names 7 dispositions that are important for adoption in any setting for story sharing that arises from North American indigenous roots. And they are respect, responsibility, reverence, reciprocity, holism, interrelatedness, and synergy. Archibald writes about respect. We observe respect for the cultural knowledge embedded in the stories and respect for the people who have owned or shared stories as an ethical guide. We carry a responsibility to hold one another's stories with care and a responsibility to establish guidelines for whether or not our stories can be shared outside of the bonds of the table. We open our story sharing time with ceremony to show reverence from the ground of life that has given birth to our stories and to establish an ethical framework for holding the truth of one's story with care. Reciprocity means that the stories that emerge around the kitchen table belong to no one person. The purpose of story sharing is not for any person to mine stories for a personal agenda. Reciprocity invites us to pause following the sharing of our stories. This is a moment to discern how the confluence of the stories shared might be calling us toward individual or collective decolonial action. I want to be clear here about reciprocity. The story sharing project is not about reinforcing settler comforts. What is central here are Black, Brown, and Indigenous futures. Holism indicates the intent of a space that welcomes stories that attend to multiple dimensions of human experience: intellectual thought, spiritual reflection, emotional expression, and the centering of the body and the ways our stories take up space. The principle of interrelatedness means that we must be as present in the listening to stories as we are in the sharing of stories. When another is sharing their story, the work of the listener is to suspend distraction and focus fully on the organic truth of the story emerging from the teller. We listen, prepared to take responsibility for the inheriting of oral tradition that is present. We listen, prepared to take responsibility for the truths and communal wisdom that will emerge. The final disposition, synergy, recognizes the power of the stories shared to serve as medicine and facilitate healing. As we enact respect, responsibility, reverence, reciprocity, holism, and interrelatedness, we make connections that honor the past and create decolonial futures. Story sharing is synergistic healing work. So the third movement then, that was about story. The third movement then is ancestoring, which is a move toward reflective action. In a return to Frary, ancestoring is an attempt to put story as theory in dialogue with action. Stories are organic theories arising from the realities of our everyday lives. What is important in this movement to praxis is that our dialogue does not remain only dialogue. We are moved toward justice-pursuing decolonial action because of the emergence of the organic truths within the stories shared. This move toward praxis-oriented healing work is good ancestoring. In pursuing justice-seeking action, we are honoring the practices of creativity and resistance shared with us by our ancestors, and we are preparing to become good ancestors ourselves by pursuing liberating practice that can create the decolonial future for generations to come. Final step is blessing one another. Blessing one another is an act of lateral kindness. When we bless one another, we reflect our hopes and prayers for the ways our kin around the table might seek wholeness from their own space. Closing kitchen table practice with a blessing to one another invites us to name the pieces of one's story that were important to carry forward into the space for pursuing action. It reinforces identity and confirms the intent to move toward the decolonial future. So a few final words. In participating in these practices, we invite you to consider the wells of ancestry and tradition in your own communities, which can foster leadership and governance that can cultivate practices that are reciprocitous in nature. These practices aren't ours. We don't own them. At the same time, you are receiving a window into a world as you witness a group of Indigenous scholars having a conversation about leadership and governance that would most often happen in spaces exclusive to our communities. Hold this conversation with care. Practice the 4 steps of kitchen table practice tonight with respect, reverence, reciprocity, and responsibility. As you leave this space tonight, you can take this practice with you. Walk these 4 steps in your own leadership in ways that draw from your own wells of tradition. But please don't mimic indigeneity in your practice. We hope that you will adapt them toward the creation of decolonial futures in your own spaces, drawing from your own ancestral wells. This approach, says Leanne Simpson, quote, does not discriminate by gender, by age, by ability, or any of those things. The implicate order only cares if you believe, if you're living your life in an engaged way, end quote.
Good evening, everyone. I have a song, but most of my songs they have stories behind them. And the song, I think I call them Tastanagis, Hoktis here. They're warrior women. That's what it's called. Tastanagi is warrior women. But the song, my dad was, I related this little story. My dad was incarcerated in the Bacon boarding school. And it was nothing happy about it. He used to always look at a star, an evening star, and it was in the general direction where his mom was. And it connected him with that, and that's what he lived with. And he said he cried just about a year every night when he would look up to that star. I was fortunate to come back and see my mother and father pass from this world. And every morning my dad, I could see, early in the morning, he would be singing this song. And it's a morning prayer song. And it was years later, after they all passed away, that I just know that he was singing for his kids, for all his siblings, to never give up, to endeavor, and you'll make it to where you want to be. And he would sing this every morning. And I thought it was ironic that he ended his life in Muskogee, probably 4 miles from where Bacone was. But but this is that song, and if you will. Momes komagi halwe talovan momes komagi halwe talo opoetak ke sabi yana halwe taloan puandok kes abi yana alwi talo enak kalge sapi yana halwe taloa enak kalge sapi yana alwi talo momes koma kis alwe talovan momes koma kis alwi talovan. Mado. The reason most of the time, most of our people, when they sing, they close their eyes because they can see our ancestors and they can hear them singing with them, and that's why I adopted that too. My dad told me this, and he also told me that these songs here will take you places, and they've taken me from the East Coast to the West Coast, bringing out these songs and these stories that go behind them. And it's always a struggle. Our songs most of them were brought over on the Trail of Tears. So they have a good meaning, and they were always talking about we're going to this new place. They're not looking back. We always look forward. But I just want to thank you for allowing me to come out and share some songs. Do I have more or what? Yeah. At the end? All right. Just want to thank you all again, but it's good to just to have these songs. They're so beautiful, and they really have a good meaning. Like he says, my dad said it was for us to endeavor and persevere. We'll make it to where we want to be, and that's for all of us, really. That's for all of us. So, Mado.
Anin, bonjour, nin nakawinawak, ekwe, nin Anishinaabe kwe, onjibikan sagagunin, kipuapakan ni mama, nin makwadonam, nin mishkomanakwe, nin dishnakaz, Sherry Russell, nin dishnakaz. It is wonderful to be here this evening and just to say thank you Wotka and Carly for starting off in such a beautiful way with the arts and the expressions that you both have shared. And Wotka mentioned that in the songs, our ancestors can hear us. And I was always taught that when we speak our languages, our ancestors are cheering us on, because for many of us, our languages were taken away. And I'm still trying to learn mine. So if I have Anishinaabe speakers that have heard that, I apologize if I've mispronunciated anything. But I think I did a little better than maybe some other people may have. So, no names. So, all that to say, I'm Sherry Russell, and I have a bit of a teasing kind of sense of humor. So, if I poke fun, it's not meant in any malicious kind of way. So, but that's one of the things about our kitchen table, or the table that we often gathered at, whether it was in a teepee or around a table like this, wherever we gathered as community. There was always some teasing. So go for it, girls, is what I'm just going to say. And I'm open to it as well. So if anything I say, you're more than welcome to tease me on that. It's wonderful to be part of this kitchen table experience. And I want to start off with a quote from one of our elders, Art Solomon, who's Anishinaabe. And he centers women in this because so often in our communities, the center of governance has already been articulated. The center of education was in the home. And women were often the facilitators of that experience. And Art says, woman is the center of the wheel of life. She is the heartbeat of the people. She is not just in the home, but she is the community. She is the nation, one of our grandmothers. The woman is the foundation on which nations are built. She is the heart of her nation. If that heart is weak, the people are weak. If her heart is strong and her mind is clear, then the nation is strong and knows its purpose. The woman is the center of everything. And so we might not call ourselves Native feminists because within many of our traditions, women were esteemed and respected in ways that have been decimated through the acts of colonization. And so we want to restore that. And I'm so blessed to be up here with some very brilliant women. Whether or not they have credentials behind their name or not, we have some amazing scholars amongst us. And I leaned over and I said to Anne, in our Nates community, we don't give anybody titles because there's a level of differentiation then. And so it is wonderful to be here. Even in this, I've been named as a facilitator, but I will say, as a facilitator, we're going to just kind of tip that upside down a little bit. Because often facilitators or the leader takes the most time and the most talking. So as we go through this, I'm actually going to start with somebody else. They don't know who yet on the table I'm going to start at, so there might be a little bit of anxiety, but we might, in true Anishinaabe fashion, we might go counterclockwise to say that. But we have some incredible women in our lives, and we've heard the stories of how women have used their experiences as acts of resistance against colonization. And so just want to share a story of some of the women in your life. They may be Indigenous, they may not be, who have shaped the fabric of all that you are and what you do. Now, notice how I said that. So often in Western epistemologies, we're focused on what we do. But for Indigenous peoples, it's who we are that is centered. And so how have they shaped you and the work that you do? And how have they impacted you, maybe in ways that you recognize or even in ways that have been unrecognized in that time? So as I leaned over and touched Anne, just to give her a little heads up, wasn't that just so gentle? There we go. We'll start with Anne. We'll just go counter, or no, this is clockwise. This is clockwise. There we go.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Sherry.
Oh, you're welcome.
I think. First of all, I would say two women who have been really essential in the development of who I am are here tonight. My mother, Jenny Walker, and my Aunt Mary Jo Walker. And these two women have taught me that at some points you drive the car with grit and grace and lots of good humor. And they are both just forces of nature. So I wouldn't, my matrilineal heritage would just not be what it is if I didn't have these two in my lives. The person who comes before, especially my Aunt Mary Jo, who's important to name, is my grandmother, Trula Tosh Jackson, who was a Cherokee woman here in Oklahoma in the early part of the 20th century, and my grandmother on my mother's side, Edith Catherine Samsel Walker, also important to name those ancestors here tonight. But I want to tell you a story about another woman as well. So when I went to seminary when I was 23 or something like that, just really excited to live on the West Coast and get out of Oklahoma, I couldn't find myself in seminary at first. Like, I just could not locate myself. And I didn't understand why all these dudes wanted to sit around and talk about other dudes who didn't seem to have any grounding in reality to me. Sorry, dudes. So I made my way through like my first semester in seminary, just feeling very like dislocated and unrecognized, and my grades sort of showed for it. In my second semester, I took a class with Karen Baker Fletcher on theology, ethics, and culture, and I read a book by Gloria Anzaldúa. And her book changed my life. Gloria Anzaldúa is a Chicana American writer. She's passed away. And she wrote about being at the intersections of being Chicana and being white, and living in a space along the US border that was both on one side colonized and on one side free for her. So what does it mean to sort of live in a space where you're living a both and reality as a person who's literally living on a physical borderland, but also on an epistemic borderland, right, in a border space. And I found this woman who was drawing from a well of Mexican indigenous spirituality and talking about being a both and person and the gifts that can be brought about by reckoning with both pieces of your identity, but also creating something new and creative out of that. And that freed me and led me to look for women in theological spaces that understood what it meant to be a both and person and a border crossing person, and would help me sort of live into the creativity in my own scholarship of what that meant.
Now it's my turn. My name's Hannah Callhorn. I'm gonna tell you guys a little bit about where I'm from because it wasn't talked about. I'm from originally this little town called Gore. It's around Tenkiller Lake, if you've ever heard of it. My people, Cherokee Nation people, were relocated to the Park Hill area. After high school, I went to Northeastern State University and began diving in deeper into my reconnection journey. So yeah. Women have been the backbone of my life, guys. I was raised by my grandmother, and especially through this semester, I'm taking Native American. Native American women, spirituality and traditions, got to put all that in there. But I'm realizing more so now about how much the embedded tradition was in my family. I didn't realize it. The storytelling through stories, through singing, and the way that singing was an aspect of healing and endurance even if it's just through chores. I think about that a lot, and as I work within churches, I bring that up. I know Richard's heard me a lot, not to call you out, but I preach about that a lot, about honing into our stories so much that within our next generations, they're embedded on our hearts. So I often, when I sing these songs in church or when I hear these melodies, I can picture my grandmother still singing them to me. But now presently, I had a job not that long ago, and I was really struggling, and my boss, Reverend Judy Deere, she just said, Hannah, Native women got to make their own place. We just have to. It's not going to be given to us. And so that's really helped me. I prayed a long time for finding some good women to lead me, and I've been finding them.
Thank you for the invitation to be a part of this space. I think in many ways, the borders that have been placed upon us delineate who is indigenous and who is Latine. And, but we are all indigenous from this part of the hemisphere. And so, in thinking about my own roots as a Puerto Rican and Italian woman, my father was Puerto Rican, my mother was Italian. Puerto Rico, along with what is most of Turtle Island, is the longest colony in history. When Christopher Columbus came in 1492 to what is known as Hispaniola, which is now the Dominican Republic and Haiti, those are now independent countries. Puerto Rico is still a colony of the United States. And it was declared so by Christopher Columbus in 1493. It's the longest continuing colony. And when I think about my own ancestors, madres, on that side of my family, but also thinking about my grandmother who took a oh, yep, it just goes in and out. She took a boat from Italy as a single woman in 1915 to come to the United States. And when my mother was born in the US, she only knew Italian. And when she went to school, they would beat her every time she would not speak in English. And so in thinking about the migratory patterns of this world and how they've been carved in many ways by colonization and by poverty and by the ways that we are forced to move to certain places and forced to conform has been a part of my journey as well. And you mentioned Gloria Anzaldúa and the ways that we exist in the between, in the betwixt in the between, and Gloria would say it's the Nepantla, the in-between space in which we reside. And I think of my mother, so in her own story, in her own journey of having to conform, even in what she became a white woman, right? In the United States, Italians were not considered white for many, many years, and so she became white in American public imagination. She did so with a lot of grit and grace, and I think that those two words have already been shared this evening. But one particular story about my mother, I remember very clearly when I was in high school. I switched high schools. The private school I was in was not serving me very well. It wasn't a great place, but they were giving us free tuition because I was giving a name to the school, whatever that meant. But when I decided to leave that school, the school charged my mother for the entire 3 years of tuition that I was there, all in one lump sum, and they would not release the school records to my new school until she had paid that entire bill. And I remember very clearly my mother in that moment, and she went and she fought it and she lost. And so she went to every friend that she had and asked to borrow money to pay that tuition so that my records could be released before I graduated from high school. And that kind of grit and determination, and Sherry, you mentioned the woman, the quote, the woman is the foundation of nations. Women really are the foundation, not only of families, but of communities and societies. And she, with her grit and her grace, did what needed to be done to meet the expectation, but she did it in a way that made sense for her and made sense for our community and our family. And I like to think that I get a little bit of my subversive sensibilities from her, because I often seek to try to subvert at any moment that I can the systems, the structures that would seek to keep me down, to keep our people down, to keep my people down. And so I learned that from her.
My earliest influence was still not working. Okay, if we must. My earliest influence of what family is and what keeps family together was my grandmother. She was a Anglo woman married to a native man in a time when that was not very well looked upon. She had my mother and my uncle with him. She was the person who taught me about what it means to look at people and see the humanity in them. She never had a bad word to say about anyone. When she finally passed, for her funeral, she wanted to give gifts to the people who had been part of her life. And so for family members, she gave roses. And then she gave daisies to friends that attended. While she was raising me, my grandfather, who we lived away from where, well, our original homelands are in Mississippi, Pontotoc County. And we were forced to walk to Oklahoma. And my family, my grandfather's family wound up in Tishmingo, Oklahoma. And he served as, well, his grandfather served as a translator for the Council of the Five Civilized Tribes. And so everybody prior to my grandfather spoke Chickasaw. When it came to my grandfather, they made a conscious decision for him not to learn the language. And so I can point to 1910 as when we lost that connection. But like Hannah, it's interesting to me as I grew and I started to read and speak to other elders and people in community, the ways in which they both taught me at home from their rural upbringing and from their own context. There's a lot of richness that I am reclaiming and recovering. As far as my scholarship goes, I was born and raised in Midwest City, Oklahoma, a very colonial military city. I often tell my students, as a person growing up in that particular area, our mascots growing up were, I was an East Side Elementary Jet, a Jarman Junior High Rocket, and a Midwest City High School Bomber. Now, because of my grandmother and my grandfather's influence, that never quite sat right with me. To have children identify, valorize, and celebrate an identity based on machines of death. So if you want to know how to get a decolonial, anti-imperial theologian, you raise them in Midwest City as a person who lives on the borders and in between. I have never felt comfortable. I have always been referred to as the little Indian girl. Some of my earliest memories were of the land run reenacted for history on my elementary school playground, where we were given spikes and hammers to go and stake our claim to land. Yeah. The violence that our education system does through well-intentioned means of educating us is something I've never forgotten. My seminary experience, I was very lucky that I came through Phillips at a time when there was a cohort of indigenous students. Of that cohort, 4 of us graduated. Not all of us graduated. During that tenure, I had no Native teacher, no Native instructor. It wasn't until I was in my PhD program that I had 2 indigenous scholars who mentored me and who took me in and did independent studies for me and sat on my comprehensive exams and my dissertation committee. While I was here, the person who really championed me and told me that I should pursue a PhD was Dr. Ann Jo, who's a first-generation Asian American, Korean, South Korean theologian herself who deals with Christology. The first Native woman I ever read was in an anthology on Native Christianity, and it was written by Tweety Sombrero. And I remember reading that, and I read it because I asked my history professor, we're doing all these readings, and we're looking at womanist, and we're looking at Asian, and we're looking at where are the Native Christian women? And she said, I don't know, I'll have to look. And Ellen Blue came back to me with this article, or this chapter out of a book on Native Christianity. Years later, I was at a conference with the Oklahoma Indian Missionary Conference, and it was a group of ministry women who got together, and Tweety Sombrero was there. And I remember being in the car with her and driving her to lunch and saying to her, I just want you to know you were the first Native American woman scholar that I ever encountered in my Master's of Divinity program. And that meant so much to me to see someone who was doing scholarship and publishing and making her voice heard in a way that I had never experienced before. And she just kind of nodded and didn't say anything. And then later, when we were back there, she said, I was so humbled, I didn't know what to say. Because for me, it was an opportunity and something I did. But as we talked, I found out that she was a student of Vine Deloria and of George Tinker. Vine Deloria is one of the first texts that I read that really explained to me why I felt the way I do about Christianity and the world around me through my grandmother and my grandfather's influence. And also, he taught George Tinker, who was on my dissertation committee and also did comprehensive exams with me and did an independent study with me when he didn't have to. And he supported my work. And so there's this genealogy that happened in which Vine Deloria, because of him, we had George Tinker, and because of George Tinker, we have scholars like Tweety Sombrero, and because of Tweety Sombrero and George Tinker and Vine Deloria, I became a scholar with my PhD. And so one of the great honors of my life is to be able to teach other Native students and be that witness, because I'm not going to be perfect, I'm not going to be the perfect scholar, but I am the physical embodiment of the fact that we are still here. They have not silenced us, and they will not silence us. And so it is my honor and my privilege when I have Native students come through and other marginalized groups come through, and to embrace their education in a way that sometimes I found to be extremely lonely and decentering, because there weren't people until much later in my journey that could support me and affirm my scholarship. So.
Pivadaye von hat na hesheve na natistas na sutai na Jewish. I think you might have not have recognized that in my tribe, my name is One Hut. I think Doug, I don't know how many times I tried to teach him how to say it, but that's fine. It feels very complimentary, you know, that like, yeah, I can't come out of an English speaker's mouth, you know, like, yeah, because it's hard. It's hard getting those textures back of your original language once you're immersed in English. I am Northern Cheyenne and Sutai, and my mother is Jewish. I live in southeastern Montana on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation. Who I think of the women in my life is this, and they're present here as well. They're in the spirit world. And so I think of my grandma Annie, my biological grandmother, and I think of, we just called them the grandmas, and it was like Marie, Louise, and Maritha. And they took over as my grandmas when my biological grandma passed. And then they took over also because I have their mother's name, which is One Hut. And so I grew up in the church. I think I went for snacks. And then my teenage years, I went because my parents made me. But as I got older, we did get bench seats too. So the pews were a lot softer. That was a hit. The grandmas did that. And also just seeing them in the back row of the church, they always took it up. Someone was always cutting their fingernails in the middle of the service. Like you could hear the clicking. They were goofing around in the back, but they would pay attention when the scripture was read in Cheyenne or the Cheyenne songs were being read. And one time I remember giving a sermon and I was teasing the pastor. I didn't know I wasn't supposed to tease the pastor because that's cultural. We tease, but I guess you don't tease some people. I still don't get that. And my grandma, I remember looking to the audience and my grandmas were in the back row just laughing, like bending over, and they can't sit up straight, and it's like they're falling out. And it was just a reminder to me that, you know, in these places that we take so serious, that we still need to have humor, that we still need to be authentic, that we still need to be human. And I quit going to church after COVID because I realized what kept me in that physical space was my grandmothers in the back row. And it's very difficult to become an auntie and not have your grandmas, you know, above you to let you be a little bit immature longer. And so I've had to mature significantly. And I think also just to say, we would go to a lot of church conferences and I would get asked to speak and they would say, come on, Una, like come stay in our hotel room. And I would be like, I can't stay with y'all. You party all the time because they'll stay up late watching Game Show Network. And then they wake up early and they would catch the soap operas. But they would always tell me, no matter how nervous I would get, you know, just keep talking. And they made it okay for me. They made it okay for me when my Cheyenne wasn't that good. Or they made it okay for me when I embarrassed myself. Or when they fell asleep when I was speaking, they said, that was the best sermon I've ever heard. And I'm just like, yes, like they were just happy I was on the stage and behind the pulpit. And the part that makes me, I still get very angry and probably some resent in there somewhere about the ways they have gone unrecognized. And I feel like if the broader church ever knew who was sitting in those pews, they could never be recognized enough. And who is sitting in those pews are descendants of ancestors that were massacred at Sand Creek. They're descendants of Cheyenne people that got relocated to western Oklahoma, that made it back to Montana being pursued by the Army. They are storytellers of the Fort Robinson Massacre, each one their own little library, and always teaching me how to be. And if the church only knew who was in those pews, but the church didn't know, the church didn't bother to know, and they still don't know. And so I think that is one of the things they have taught me, is to speak up, to use my voice. Even when I was young, they were supporting me. And to always also maybe have a little bit of trickster in you. Growing up, we either had to be Christian or Native American. And even still nowadays, it's very difficult to say you're a Christian and being Native American. So we get by it. I remember at lunch today, I wasn't hearing correctly. I thought Doug asked me if I was Christian. But I think he asked me, do you know a Christian? Like a person named Christian. And so I was like, when he asked me that, I was like, man, that's a hard question. Like, I don't know, this is gonna take a bit. Like, this is, yeah. And I'm like, oh, do I know you that well yet? And then I was like, well, I work for a Christian organization, hoping that would cover it. And then I looked like at all the aunties that were at the table, and they're looking at me like, you heard wrong. And so then once I heard correctly, but I was ready to go there. I was ready to say, no, I follow Jesus. Because Christianity is very different than Jesus. And if you're Native American, you know. And so I think of those ways in which my aunties embodied what I want the church to become. Sitting in those pews as people that had just gone to Sundance or went to Sweat Lodge and very much experienced the abuse of boarding schools ran by Christian folks. And yet they still were in those pews. Like, what kind of faith is that? To show up, even given that they weren't being recognized, that they weren't seen as important, that they were seen more as recipients of a message instead of being the message. And so that's what I take with me. And their humor all the time, they're laughing, they're joking. And hopefully I'm doing them justice by not being original. I hope that some of what I said would be words that they themselves would say.
Thank you. You can keep that. I got my own. So everyone else has shared. I'm just going to highlight a few women in my life that have made a strong impact on me, long before I even knew them or re-met them, perhaps I'll say. So just to give you a little bit of story, I am part of the 60 Scoop. If you don't know what that is, it was an intentional policy by the Canadian government to remove children from their homes that were Indigenous and place them in non-Indigenous homes to essentially assimilate us and eradicate any connection that we have with our biological families. And so I was literally scooped up one day with two of my siblings when my mom went grocery shopping and left us in the care of a teenage babysitter. And she came home to her youngest 3 children, she has 10, but us youngest 3 children being taken. And she didn't know where we went because she only spoke Nakawinawak, which is Soto. And she didn't read English, and there was this piece of paper, and she's like, I don't know what this means. So she called my cousin, who lived about 10 hours away, and my cousin heard that the children were gone, and in our family we also have a history of residential schools where children were taken off to residential school, and my cousin could not understand why we'd been taken, and so she drove 10 hours, read the piece of paper, found that we'd been taken by social services, and so advocated to get us back. And she went to the social worker. Social worker said, sorry, they've gone into the system and we can't trace them. We don't know where they've been. Because in those days, that's what it was meant to do. And so my cousin, in that moment, decided, I'm going to learn their system. I'm going to learn it so that this never happens again to any of our children. So she became a social worker, which in years later, I really struggled with social workers. So it was kind of one of those, I'm not sure what to do with this because of my history with social workers and being in the system. But she became a social worker and advocated for our people, so much so that when the provincial government decided to assert their force and say, you need to follow these rules and this rule, and you need to account for everything. And my cousin said, I know where every child is in our community, and I don't need to fill out your paperwork in the way that you want us to, but I can account for every one of them. And so they went to court system because there was a fight between the provincial government and the federal government, and we fall under federal jurisdiction, not provincial jurisdiction, so they were overstepping to begin with. And so I had this beautiful picture of my cousins fighting against the provincial system. And so I think I got a little bit of fight in me somewhere, just a little bit, which has served me well most times. And when I think of my scholarship, one of the women that impacted me, I did not meet. I don't know her well. Actually, I don't even know her name. But we were in the provincial, or in the federal government. We were in Parliament, and we were responding. I was responding on behalf of our denomination for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And there was a lady that stood up, and she was a survivor of residential schools. And I was asked a question about how the churches were going to respond to this. And she asked that question, having gone through residential schools. And in my mind, right away, I thought of one of my sisters who I was very close to that went through residential schools. And I said, okay, how am I going to answer this? Not for this lady, but if my sister were here, how am I going to answer this honestly and truthfully? And so in that moment, I never forgot that lady, and I ended up doing actually my PhD dissertation in response to that. I never met her, she stood at a distance in a big room and asked me that question. I'm like, I'll never have met her, but the impact has changed my life and my scholarship as a result. So we've heard some beautiful stories of resistance. We're going to start over here with Christina, right? And just, as you've heard some of the stories, and we think of that phrase of ancestry, what are some of the implications of these stories that you've heard, maybe in one or two or more, that provide some wisdom and examples for us as leaders, whether it's in a religious context, whether it's academic scholarship, or theological education. And we'll work this way. Just quickly, yeah. Keep it.
So one thing I'll just say briefly, because I know we're short on time. I think in all of our stories, what we've heard is the power and the presence and the impact that one person can have, namely women, to shift our own understanding, to shift understandings of whole communities, and in the face of oppression, of obstacles, to find another way, and to not. I don't want to use the word destroy, but to not be broken, to not be, I think broken, to not be broken by those systems and those who want to exploit us. And I think about theological education, and as someone who has been doing this for a little while, I see the ways that institutions, through the power or the leadership because I teach leadership, I study leadership, I talk about leadership, and I talk about decolonial leadership first and foremost, the power of one person to break the spirit of not only an individual, but of a institution and of a system. And I think I've seen that more times than I would care to admit. I serve as a commissioner on the Board of Commissioners for the Association of Theological Schools, which is all of the 270 plus theological schools in North America. And I've seen it all. The good and the bad of ugly and the ugly of theological education. And I think when, and I see the ways that women, and in particular, women of color, indigenous women get erased, that their labor is erased, that their contributions are erased, and they're silenced in many ways. And I think recognizing that actually and I see that, and I'll be honest about that. I see that in my own institution, right? I see the ways that women do the labor and the men publish the books, right? We do the administration because we're good at it, right? But it's because we hold the institutions. Right? And when one singular person can make or break an institution, that means that the power structure of institutions is broken. And so sharing leadership, sharing wisdom, sharing power is really, I think, the only way forward in how we think about what the possibilities of theological education are. I come from a culture in which my own contribution to something and what I have to say about something is only a partial truth. And it's not to minimize what I'm saying, but it's only partial because it does not include the wisdom of everyone else. It is only complete when it has the wisdom of everyone else. And so, and it's better. And that's what happens in the classroom, right? We have a discussion and it's made better, not by what I say as the teacher, but what we bring to it together. And my hope is that we can do more of these kinds of conversations and ways of leading around a kitchen table, because it's only complete when we have all shared our stories. It's only complete when we are all doing something together. That was not brief. I apologize.
Is it to me? Oh, I'm next. One or two. Representation matters. That's period. Those could be the few words I could say. I'm realizing that more and more throughout my educational journey. Without Native women speaking from the pulpit, without the Native women offering me a place to sleep and some food on the table, I would not still be here doing this work. Through hearing everyone's story, resistance, the aspect of listening, the intentionality of listening is very core within this, because, I mean, we can show up in a space all we want, but if we're not soaking it in, that aspect, and as well as just being aware of our worldviews that we're interpreting from. Because as we talk about our grandmas, they clearly were not with the general population of worldview that we see today. So that's what I carry with me, and I want to thank all of you here. I feel like I gained some cousins and some aunties today.
Oh, you got aunties. I'll be quick. So I think there's two sort of significant things that the women in my life and women in leadership have taught me. And one comes from my origins, and that is be creative and be full of laughter and good humor, because it is that creativity and that humor is what will sustain you when you have to do the other part of things, which is to resist. And that's what Women in the Academy have taught me, especially Black, Brown, and Indigenous women have taught me what it looks like to resist creatively and in a highly relational way. And so resistance for me doesn't mean like fight all the time. Resistance means like get creative about how you do your work and do it in relational ways. And if what you receive back isn't relationality, then let it go. Right? And think of it with good humor. But, lead from a space of resistance and care and creativity, and always find those places where, the work within your power can be used to create better futures for our kin.
Thanks. We're going to keep on, but I think you guys have a mic? Okay. As I heard the stories, I would say I heard them overcoming the lies that we've been told as Indigenous people. The lies being we shouldn't be here, we don't belong, we're not capable, we're not lovable. And I heard a resistance to that, and I just say, yes, let's keep overcoming those lies.
Okay, I obviously just realized I really need bifocals. Woo, okay. I think for me, to be super quick, is it needs to be practical, especially like this methodology. We all have very busy lives, so why not fit it into our normal schedule and start normalizing our methodology or whatever? Because I don't know about you, but I got tired of going to school and learning something that wasn't applicable to what I wanted to do. And so thinking about that, and also just thinking about the multi-generational that needs to happen. I know when my aunties would sit at the table, they would sit and smoke, but I would be under the table getting all the gossip. And so I feel like that prepared me, and so I feel like, and then they'd switch to Cheyenne and they didn't know I knew it. And so then you get kicked out to the backyard. So I feel like having that context prepared me as an adult to be present, sitting at the table instead of underneath goofing around.
I think what I take most from this particular group of women in this conversation is just the persistence and the endurance and the commitment to our communities and to our families. And I think we're here because we had that modeled for us in really beautiful, painful, wonderful ways. And that ability to face reality with imagination, not just creativity, but to imagine better futures, new and innovative ways of being in relationship, and breaking down hierarchies that try to separate us. I think that's what this table is about for me, and I just really appreciate everyone here. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we go on to the next movement, we're going to save that to the end. So you're going to do this little part.
Okay, so you've witnessed 3 of the 4 movements of kitchen table practice as we've demonstrated. So the first was with our friend Watko, the ceremony piece, and then we did the story sharing, and then we did the ancestring. And so now you get an opportunity to practice a little bit, but it's like a very little bit because we're kind of running out of time. So on your tables, there's a card that says kitchen table practice. And you're going to have the opportunity to just like feel the practice a little bit yourselves. And I'm going to move you quickly. So like maybe 2 people at your table are going to get to like participate in each movement. And you guys self-govern that. We could be here till 10 o'clock to do this, but and like if we were truly on Indigenous time, we would. But I have to go to work tomorrow. So what we're gonna do is your first movement is ceremony. And in ceremony, I just invite you to offer an act of hospitality to one another. We have tea and some goodies in front of you. And so you can offer one another the goodies on your plates, and you can pour tea for one another. Ceremony can be a simple act of hospitality, right? Ceremony can be a simple act of hospitality. So take a few moments and share and offer hospitality to one another. I'm gonna borrow this for a second. All right, everybody have a little snack, a little moment of hospitality for one another. So we're gonna move to story sharing, loved ones, relatives. We're gonna move to story sharing. And so I invite you to offer this in terms of story sharing. Here's your question. Oh, I need my reading glasses. What stands out for you now, given what you've heard tonight? Just what stands out for you, given what you've heard tonight? What resonates with who you are and who your people are? So take a few moments, enough for at least a couple people at your table to share a story or share a reaction related to what you've heard tonight. Okay, so you're moving on to story sharing. What stands out for you given what you've heard tonight, and what resonates with who you are and who your people are? I'm going to give you about 2 more minutes for story sharing, and then I'm going to move you right along. Okay. So the next step in your process, I know you're so into talking to each other, but I am going to make you stop. Okay, can you hear me? Thank you. So the next step, you've done story sharing, you're going to move toward ancestring. So this is your praxis moment, right? What might you take from this space that will change the way you move through the world or the way that you engage in leadership? So we're asking not for ideas here or stories, but actions that you might take, even a small one. What sort of next step could you take in the direction of building a decolonial future from what you've heard here tonight? Okay, go.
Yeah, but if you, right, but if you do it right, you know, so it's sort of like, what's wrong with this picture here, right? Like, all I have to do is screw up and I never get it.
All right, if we can just draw your attention up for a moment. I know you're having lots of wonderful conversation, and you guys are going to go away engaging in these wonderful thoughts that you've just shared. But just to finish this section, we usually finish a kitchen table with a blessing. And so we thought that we would do our blessing up here, and then you guys can do your blessing at your table. So I was going to say, in true fashion, I was going to start over here and work this way. Is that all right, ladies?
So I'm going to offer a blessing for Erica. And I wanted to say thank you for your presence, for the joy that you bring, for the joy as resistance and resilience, and just the beauty of all that you bring. And I wish you only joy, only resilience, and only beauty moving forward.
I am going to offer blessings to Sherry, and yeah. Ooh, I just had a moment. Okay, thank you so much for being an auntie and teaching us the ways. And thank you so much for traveling and just keeping us all focused on the topic. And I wish you safe travels as you make your way back home.
And it's been a blessing to be invited by you and Lisa. Thank you so much for that. And one word that has come to my mind is the gift. You talked about grit and grace. And in that, I think you also have a sense of collaboration and hospitality that I've seen modeled just beautifully. And I think as you walk, not only with grit and grace, but as you walk with collaboration and hospitality, doors and hearts will be transformed. And so appreciate that.
Hannah, I knew I was your auntie before today, but I'm not sure you did. So my word for you as a blessing to take forward is sing. And keep singing. You talked about the songs of your ancestors and how you sing those songs, and it brings comfort to your soul. And so continue to sing the songs and also trust the voice who sings.
thank you for being here. We've had such good little conversations in between. You've given me little bits to go home and chew on that I'm very thankful for as well. But I want to send you with this blessing. Rest knowing that your work is paving so many pathways and so many communities that you are so unaware of and you will never know. I've heard so many people talk about you already, and I've seen their work and the inspiration that's come from it, and so thank you.
Thank you. Lisa, thank you so much for your brilliance and your care. And I think that those things go hand in hand. You care because you are brilliant, and you are brilliant because you care. And with that, I want to bless you with surety and courage, and I hope for you a sense that you know and that others begin to know, and others who already know of your brilliant care will live into that promise to be kin to you and to do justice by you.
Okay, so this is your moment to offer a blessing to close your kitchen table practice. And so I'll invite you to just offer a simple blessing to the person sitting next to you on your left. It can be something that you've heard from them this evening that you want to sort of reinforce, or just a simple blessing as they leave this space. But as an act of reciprocity, offer a blessing. All right, have blessings been given and received? Okay. Okay, so you've experienced the practice tonight, and we are just very, very appreciative that you took the time to be open to something new and different, and to storytelling as a way of theorizing and pursuing liberative praxis. So thank you for that opportunity. We want to give you 5 minutes. If somebody has a burning question, I know it's time to go home, tired people. But we do want to give an opportunity for burning questions. So, yeah, and you can ask questions, responses from anyone here. Yes, it will be on Philip's YouTube page, and it was live streamed tonight. I enjoyed all of this, and we're already planning how to bring this into our own community. Okay, well, yes, sir. Esther's idea. Thank you. That's an important. Thank you, Mom. So I do want to name that, kitchen table practices, I said in the beginning, it's not exclusive to indigenous community. Womanist theologians have been writing, especially in practical theology, have been writing about, practices of resistance around the kitchen table for several decades. And so we certainly find a sense of kinship with womanist practical theologians and theologians in that sense. And right, the invitation is draw from your own ancestral well. There is relationship and collaboration and reciprocity at the depth of all of our ancestral wells. And some of it is reclaiming and retraditioning that. So thank you for that. Mom. And also, just know there's an invitation there, right? This isn't, like I said, it's not exclusively ours.
And I think actually for people that come from a Christian background, we have examples of this throughout Scripture. Jesus sat with his disciples and engaged in this. Even before that, based on Hebraic tradition, they sat there and they said, why is this night unlike any other night? And so just the kitchen table, whatever culture is there, so.
Sure, why not? And we can come to a community near you as well. Yeah, so there's multiple possibilities for doing this. Yes, we could do it again, and yes, we'd be happy to come to you and facilitate and invite you to, find your own space of resonance with a practice like this. But for now, we're going to hang out together and continue to vibe off the kitchen table. Well, I hope you've had a wonderful night. I hope that you've discovered something new about one another. Yeah. Just a word of thanks to my sisters and aunties up here, and we invite Wutko Long back for our closing.
Wow, somebody's pretty tall here. I just want to thank y'all again, and I had a good time here, learned a lot, and women are powerful. If it weren't for women, none of us would be here. There's a story I have here. It was a woman, two sisters on the Trail of Tears, and they got separated. And one sister was really lonesome for her sister, and she kept calling for her. And as they were going along, she started composing this song. And what she was saying is that wherever you're at, I know that you'll be praying for me, and I'll be praying for you. And eventually, as she was singing this, the people picked it up, and it went along the trail, and it went to her sister. But that's what this song is saying for all of y'all, because I'll be praying for y'all, y'all pray for me. But this is what she was saying. Estaman estom volatskir ameme kosavach giran chememe kosava me kosava Ketoyatskar momes komagi estamanes tomes volatskir hameme kosabach giran Chememe kosava me kosava ketoyatskar momes komagis estamanes tomes Volatskid hameme kosapach gidan chimimi kosavagi akasama ketoyatskar momes komagi estamanes tomes volatskid hameme kosavach giran chimimi kosavagi. All right, Madel. Thank you.